The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you for being on time, everyone. This is Marie McEwen, and welcome to my very first webinar in my monthly series on return on investment of leadership development programs. I do like to start on time, so as I said, thank you to those of you who are also on time. And I like to finish a few minutes early just to make it easy for those of you who do need to shoot off to your next meeting. You can manage your time well. And I will allow some time at the end also just for final questions and comments prior to ending the webinar. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name, as I said, is Marie McEwen, and I'm your host for the next half hour and on the monthly webinars as we move through the year. I've been working in corporate leadership development for well over 10 years now, probably coming up to about 14 years, and I've coached in excess of 800 individuals from CEOs to emerging talent within private, public, not-for-profit, and also have the privilege of facilitating or being a part of panels facilitating very large-scale leadership programs. So I have a deep and broad sense of the diversity of leaders and leadership programs that are out there, and that's really flamed my passion for ROI, and thus the book that I'm currently writing and the start of this webinar series, which will actually be the evolution of my book as well. Now, just a few logistics. As you may have noticed, I have you all on mute. This is to ensure that there are no interruptions and that there is a good quality of sound. If for any reason quality of sound isn't okay, then please just leave a note in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see that, you can actually just press on the little arrow to open up the chat box. And please feel free to be typing in any questions or comments you may like there. There's also the option to put your hand up. So please feel free to do that as well if you're wanting to attract my attention for some reason. Now, I will endeavour to address messages that do come through via the chat, but I may not get to everyone. So if for some reason I haven't been able to answer your question and you really would like some response from me, then please feel free just to include that in the chat and say, look, Marie, please, I do want an answer, and I can either get back to you via email or I can give you a call. So please feel free to send through any particular contact details. I have everyone's email addresses, but if you want me to be contacting you via a different email address or calling you, then please just leave those details in the chat box as well. So I think that's it for the logistics. So let's get into it. Now, this very first webinar is around return on investment. And as I said, it's all about leadership development and a new approach. And why ROI, you may ask, which is where I'd like to begin. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the statistics that are out there, but I'm going to share them again anyway. There's an annual global spend of over $50 billion on leadership development globally. And the majority of that is actually spent in Australasia, in Europe and in America. So here in Australia, we do actually spend a large piece of that $50 billion. Now, interestingly, Australian and New Zealand leaders have rated that their internal leadership development programs aren't necessarily particularly effective, and there's been very little change in satisfaction with leadership programs over the past 7 years. So currently, only 45% of Australian and New Zealand leaders who've been interviewed have said that they would rate their programs as effective. Now, this comes from the Global Leadership Forecast 2014-2015, Australia-New Zealand. So you might like to jump on and find a copy of that on your internet for more details. The other thing too is that there's also been another survey done which shows that while the leadership programs might not be as successful as we would hope, they are important. Leadership improvement and development programs are in the top 5 imperatives for executive leaders, and that's taken from a 2014 survey by the Conference Board CEO Challenge Survey. And again, you can jump on and just Google that one and find out more about it. So clearly there's something good going on, the fact that continually so much money is being spent and that amount does go up each year, but also something going not so great with so much money being spent and only less than half of our leaders actually being pleased with the level of the programs being delivered. So that really got me thinking around what can we be doing about that. So, sorry, and I'll just put up that screen there. So it really got me thinking around, well, why ROI? What's the value it can bring? And as far as I'm concerned, if we can't measure it, then we can't understand it and we can't improve it. And so this is where ROI becomes particularly important. It's like flying blind and hoping you land in the right destination. We need to be able to navigate the path of development, review it, and use what we learn to improve the way forward for future development investments. Clearly, there's a big gap in the calibre of the leadership programs out there. So we not only need to know what that gap is, we need to know what kind of programs are performing well and which ones aren't. So it's a really huge task, and clearly not one that can be answered easily. So what I really want to do in this very first webinar is just provide an introduction to where ROI on leadership development is currently at, and really set the scene for a case for a new approach and what needs to happen next. And that will really lead in, as I said, then to my ongoing series throughout the coming year. And at the end of this also, please feel free, as I said, to ask any further questions that may not only inform you, but also inform me around what it is you'd like to be hearing from me in these webinar series moving forward. So let's get into it. Brief history. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the history of ROI, probably the names on your screen are all very familiar. We've got Donaldson Brown. Now, 1912, I think the dates I've got up here are quite interesting. And one of my sticking points around ROI is that really when we look at where ROI began, it was back in 2012 with a fellow called Donaldson Brown who worked for DuPont in the US. And he realised there was a need to have a better overview of business practice, and thus the ROI calculation was really born as far as being used within business to help businesses understand better how they're performing. Now, in 1954, Donald Kirkpatrick developed his seminal 4-level training development model, and I'm imagining all of those who are involved in training will be very familiar with this particular model. Now, this has been seminal, and interestingly enough, if you look at 1954, so this thinking, Donald actually created this particular model in his PhD in the year 1954. He then went on to actually share this with the world a little bit later on, but it wasn't until actually 1994 that he actually created a book called Evaluating Training Programs, 4 Levels of Learning Evaluation, that this model really became well known. Now, I find that interesting that the thinking surrounding the 1994 book was based in that 1950s PhD that Kirkpatrick did. And then in 1997, we had Jack Phillips adding a 5th level, which is where ROI really came to the fore. So again, building on 1950s thinking, we had Jack adding the ROI to that. And I'd really like to just focus on this for a moment because the Kirkpatrick and Phillips model is very much the underpinning of how we tend to measure and view leadership programs or any training programs today. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around this right now. As you can see, that's an overview of the model itself, and it's very much a step-through model with beginning at the start with level 1 around how did the participants in the intervention in the program actually find the program itself. So that's where your happy sheets and action plans start to measure the thoughts and the experience of the participants themselves. Then it's looking at learning. And the whole idea, of course, in running training programs is that our participants learn something. So it's really around, well, how do we know what they've learned? And there are varying techniques. I've put a couple down there: exams, skills, practice, varying ways of actually trying to gauge how much learning has come from the programs for individuals. The third, the application and implementation, is very much around, well, okay, there may be some learning, but how is that relevant to the workplace? Is it static learning, or is it learning that's actually changing the way people are behaving back in the workplace with the jobs they do and the people they interact with? And the fourth one is then business impact. So we're starting to move closer to a sense of a return on investment. How has that actually impacted the business? Now, sales training tends to be probably the most easily measured training program, because you've really got some hard data at the end. Has sales gone up or not? Clearly, other measurements, other training programs might not be necessarily as easy to measure. And in particular, leadership programs are difficult to measure because of the soft approach many of the learnings provide. So that brings us to, so those first four levels are very much Kirkpatrick's models. You can jump on again and look for some more information on these online. There's plenty around, so I'm not going to go into how you best find those. The fifth one is where Phillips has added to the original Kirkpatrick 4-level. And this is very much around, well, that's all good and well to measure the participant, how they're feeling, what they've learned, business impact, but how do we really get some hard data on this business impact with a dollar figure? And that's when Jack Phillips did his PhD and added this in his first books, his first writings on this in 1997. Now, I also have just a visual representation of that as well. Now, just checking for the comments coming through, I can see there, Jan, you're just asking if you can get a copy of the slide deck. At the end of today's session and at the end of each session, I will be sharing a copy of the slide deck. That will actually appear in your chat box. I'll just be putting that across in, so you can just pull that down into your own computer. So please feel free to access that, and any questions around that as we go through, ask when we get to the sharing of that. So thank you for asking about that, Jan. So here you can see, just with this visual representation, when you do Google this and get online, there's a whole lot of different languaging around this, but basically this is the core representation, and it all fundamentally means the same thing. Any further questions? I really am mindful that what I'm most likely sharing now is familiar to all of you, so I'm not wanting to go into a great lecture on this. Any questions, though, before I move on? No. Okay. So, interestingly, just further to the Kirkpatrick-Phillips model, there's an additional 2 levels more recently added around sustainability and shared purpose. Now, I'm not going to go into them because I just really wanted to point out that it's interesting when we're really looking at ROI and evaluation of leadership programs, we do often get off track. Which I've done so myself to a degree this morning. But it's necessary just to see the breadth of where we're going with evaluation. And I think this is a core challenge that we have when we're trying to measure leadership development, is very much around staying on track, being really clear on what we want to measure. So these 2 additional levels proposed by Rylett around sustainability and shared purpose, while they're clearly rich and of value, they're really not additional stages per se. If we really look at the learning and the evaluation of learning, they're really adding just extra depth and detail to what it is we want our leaders to be learning. So I just wanted to put that there, that when you are out there doing your own research, and certainly when I've done my own, there are a plethora of different models and options and opinions. But really my aim is to stay very, very much solidly on the ROI, the return on investment, and on the leadership development. So I'm not going to stray out into other forms of training evaluation, but certainly what I will be sharing can potentially be used for other training programs outside of leadership development. So if we look at a little more, if we move away from really the Phillips and Kirkpatrick model. Phillips, by the way, for those of you who don't know, has really very much been the centre and forefront of ROI and leadership development for many, many years, and tends to be the dominant voice in the market. But another really interesting model is certainly through instructional design. And again, there's lots and lots of different models that you can look up through instructional design. But a particularly interesting one, and one that's really taken off in the US, is the ADDIE or PADDI model. That's, I've just got there that it's planning, analyse, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. I'm not going to go through this model in any detail, but I would like to just point out with the actual image on the screen is you can see there everything leads back to evaluation. So this model's particularly rich in ensuring that at every step of developing a program, the evaluation is swung back into and looped back through to ensure that evaluation is enhancing the program all the way through. Now, interestingly, though, not only with this particular model, but also with the Phillips model, is that the evaluation piece often at the end is either left off or cut short due to many reasons such as cost, taking too much time. There's a lot of challenges around how do we actually ensure that we are really evaluating well at the end and not just evaluating well throughout a program. So again, very much my focus is ensuring that not only are we planning well for how we need to evaluate at the beginning, but that we're actually really holding steady and following through on evaluation at the end. So interestingly too, you'll see this has come from the US Army and Navy. Phillips and Kirkpatrick are also US based. So really all our learning and all the cultural lens through which we tend to view ROI and evaluation does tend to be very US centric. So I'm quite proud to think I'm putting a bit of an Australian, Australasian lens on that. Now, I'm really not going to go in these at all. I've just put up another few. We could spend all day looking at all the different historical points that have got us to where we are with leadership development today, but I'm not going to go into that. If you are wanting some more detail on that, let me know, but otherwise, please feel free to do your own research online. So what I really want to move to is current practice, and as I've already said, very much is around the Phillips model. If you're wanting to have a greater look at that, the ROI Institute is where Jack and Patty Phillips run all their work from. So I'd advise you just to go to their website and have a good look through that for further information. They have a lot of books on ROI and one specifically for ROI and leadership development. And so that's definitely worth a greater look. But what I'm really wanting to do is move into the hard area around ROI, which is we're just not doing it, regardless of what's out there. So clearly that got me thinking around, well, if we already have the ROI Institute and we have many decades of leadership evaluation, why is it that we aren't just running evaluation on all our programs? And there's some really clear reasons why we're not doing this. It's too hard, too complicated, too time-consuming, too expensive, and longitudinal. Often, if we're wanting to measure something like the value of retention on high-worth leaders, there's often years and years of lead time as to how well we're retaining these particular leaders. So what we need to do is really start to look at, well, what do we know currently in the world of knowledge beyond leadership and training that can help us better understand how we can simplify the ROI process so that we can start to use it on every single one of our programs, from very, very small programs to really large-scale leadership programs. So again, I've just put a bit of an overview of a few things that are going on in our current world. Of course, we could fill that screen with a whole lot more. Lots of amazing things going on in the internet space, also in the social space, and particularly the one I'd like to draw your attention to is complex adaptive systems. So that's in the complexity space, quantum theory, string theory. There's a whole lot we can learn around how do we take the complex and make sure that we can use it in a way that really adds value and doesn't just add extra complexity. Now, this slide here, I couldn't resist. I just had to put this up. For those of you who are a fan of The Big Bang Theory like I am, I just wanted to share this, so you might like to go out and grab this one. This is actually just, of course, an explanation on string theory, which really has nothing to do with leadership development at all, but I thought it would be nice to have a picture up there rather than me just showing you slides. But in a bit more seriousness, the complex science, complexity leadership theoretical framework is very much around things like string theory, where these are all developing thoughts around science, physics, and they are still in their developmental stage. So there is a lot already out there around leadership and complexity science. And so what I'm really wanting to do with my research is marry these two around, well, what do we know in the world of physics? How does that align with what we know about leadership? And that's where the complexity leadership theoretical framework comes in. And how do we actually use this knowledge and this updated scientific research to help us better evaluate our programs? So this brings us to, so now what? And I see this as putting the H back into HR. So very much I'm talking about leadership, which is really very much my realm of expertise. I'm not an HR expert. I'm a leadership expert with coaching and facilitation. But certainly one thing I've noticed is that HR, and as an umbrella term with training and learning and development that comes under that, is that really HR needs a stronger seat at the table and needs to actually be informing business much more than it currently is. And certainly this is not just me saying this. So for those of HR directors who are on this call getting the hackles up, this has certainly been shown again in many of the research, and certainly in the couple of research articles I mentioned at the beginning of this session. They both point to the fact that there is not only a desire from business for HR professionals to be more engaged in the harder functions of business, but also for HR themselves to really stand up and not just be considered as a second cousin or a soft skills approach. So it's really recognising that the people are not only the leaders, but the people under the leaders are really, really imperatives for strong business outcomes and for certainly innovation and for really stepping into this very complex, agile and fast-changing world we operate in today. So that's something that I really want to marry up, is not just leadership development and the measuring of that, but how does the voice of HR really stand up and lead the way in these, rather than feeling like this is something that has to be handed over to the bean counters to really add value. So you can see there is also a paper there from Short and Harris, which does certainly go into that in more detail. And again, that's accessible online. If you're wanting to know more, you can just go on and look that up. So I think while we can see there are a lot of challenges to evaluating leadership or soft skills programs, it's not a reason to shy away from ROI. It's really an opportunity to enable measurement to be so intrinsic to the learning experience that there will be a gap in learning if it were left out. So that's very much my quest, is to make it just so much an embedded part of how we run our leadership programs, how we think about them, and really what is HR's role within that. And just be looking at how that can elevate not only the leadership programs themselves, but the way this informs business outcomes. And my vision is very much around that it really catapults the whole idea of a leadership program from being just about improving our leaders, but really informs how do we improve our businesses and how do we actually change strategy and innovation and the voice of HR within all of this. So I get quite excited when I am sharing all of this. So I'm hoping this is something that's compelling for all of you as well. So I've mentioned innovation a few times. Again, this slide I'm not going to speak to, but it is just showing you a bit of a representation of my own thinking. And you'll see there to the right, there's certainly the quantum mechanics, which is the physics from where I solidly will be bringing my model of research in the next webinar. But, you know, there's a lot going on out there in the world of ours. There's a lot happening right across the spectrums of all kinds of research and science and so on. So it's really ensuring that we are broadening our thinking and what is possible in leadership development and leadership development evaluation, but not making it more complicated and more difficult to measure. It's actually looking at that and going, this is complexity, not confusion. And how do we create simple and clear messages rather than confusing and difficult messages? So that's very much an overview of where I'm a starting point for where I'm coming from for when I do share my model in the next webinar. I just do want to check in. I know I said I would let everyone go a few minutes before the half hour. So are there any final questions or comments before we wrap up for today? Now, a few of you have asked if I can recommend any particular books for further reading. I have mentioned a few throughout this program. There's certainly Phillips, as I said, has lots of books. Kirkpatrick, his second book is called Evaluation Training Programs. If you are wanting a bit of a list, please email me. I'm happy to provide something extra, but certainly just getting on and Googling, a whole lot do come up. But the ones I've mentioned today, I highly recommend, including the research papers. And my book, ROI on Leadership Development, isn't available yet. I'm still in the process of completing that. But if anyone would like to pre-order a free copy, just email me with delivery details and I'll post one out to you as a gift for attending my webinar, and that will certainly be a standing offer across my webinars as I run these out monthly. So I think that is it for questions and comments. So all I would like to do is, again, thank you for coming along and for sharing your comments and questions. Duly noted. I know I'm not responding in the text box, but everything that you've all been putting down, I certainly will be paying attention to and weaving into my next webinar, which will be in a month's time. The details are up there of the screen. Wednesday, May 25. I'm doing a lunchtime session. That is also feedback I've been given, that it would be easier if this was one session run at lunchtime so that people are able just to slip out and munch on some lunch while listening to what I have to say. There is my email address for those of you who don't have it. If you are wanting to send me details to get a copy of my book or to just contact me for any other reason, please feel free to do so. And I thank you all for joining and wish you a great month, and look forward to having you back again next month.